Hi, today is May the 24th, 2017. It's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyersportsbetting.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about the Anthony Joshua, Wladimir Klitschko rematch. You know, when that fight is announced, because of what happened in the first fight, Joshua by KO, I'm expecting Wladimir Klitschko to be the underdog in the fight. And as soon as I can, I'm going to run to a bookmaker, a casino, and I'm going to try to place a bet on Wladimir Klitschko. Now, we know more about both fighters now because we've seen them in the ring together. Let's take a step back. Let's just talk about life philosophy for a moment and why I feel the big value, and I mean substantial value, lies in betting on Anthony Joshua's opponent. Right now, one of the things I think I've learned in life, right, is that when you see someone who's successful, you need to ask yourself, what's the reason for that person's success? Right? Is it family connections? Is it connections in general? Is it the person's talent? Is it the person's awareness? Right? Those are all different things. So, in baseball, I'm a baseball fan. I can tell you that I'll see a young pitcher with a great fastball, a spectacular fastball. Maybe he has a second pitch, a great changeup, so he can frame both pitches. But the young guy won't know how to pitch. Right? He'll have the talent. He doesn't have the knowledge. Then I'll see someone else, a young guy with a great fastball, who actually knows how to pitch. The two guys look the same. Right? Hey, that fastball is 97 miles an hour. They look the same. But they're not the same. So, there was a young guy when I was growing up, Salvador Sanchez, a boxer, right? And I'm just here to tell you that Sanchez, who died in his early 20s, was that boxer who could pitch. He understood the sport. And it was jarring because Sanchez then went on a run where he started facing older guys who you thought were masters. Danny Little Red Lopez, for the old-timers watching the show. And as you watched that fight, you understood that Sanchez not only had the gift of youth, he was in his early 20s, he had the quick reflexes, right? He had the superior stamina that comes with being younger and aware. But Sanchez also was the more skilled fighter. Right? The sport was mapped out for him. At a young age, he understood the sport. He was knowledgeable. Right? There's great footage here online of another young guy who I feel his strength was his mental awareness in the sport. Right? I don't feel this guy is necessarily the most socially aware person I've met. His past suggests that he has a problem with personal relationships, right? But Floyd Mayweather, when he was a young man, had the sport mapped out. So when he goes for his first title against Genaro Hernandez, very good fighter, very good champion. By chance, the color commentator on the fight was George Foreman, former heavyweight champion. Right? Underappreciated. One of the better champions from a skill perspective. And Foreman, the entire fight, as Mayweather wins the title for the first time. Hold on. Hey, babe, do you need to pass? Okay. Foreman was talking about the skill level Mayweather was putting down. He pointed out Mayweather's footwork in the fight. And Mayweather, who's in his very early 20s, at that point, had some of the best footwork in boxing. Now, let's just jump the fence. Other sports. I remember watching LeBron James in basketball when he was straight out of high school. I want people to look at the footage. One of the first games I saw of LeBron James in the NBA, I realized out the gate that he was one of the better passers, not just at his position, but in the league. And this was a guy who was, again, straight out of high school. Right? Clayton Kershaw, baseball. When he was a young man, yeah, he had filthy stuff. Understand, these guys had a lot going for them physically, right? LeBron James, even as a young man, as you can imagine, big guy, strong guy, right? Floyd Mayweather, freak athlete, who was a craftsman. Clayton Kershaw, throws in the mid-90s, knew how to pitch as a young man. Now, in boxing, you have some guys who had great success early in their careers. Let's talk about two guys who were among the youngest heavyweight champions in history. Right? Ali, Mike Tyson. But you started to notice the holes in their game. And don't get me wrong, both great fighters. Right? Great fighters. But you started to notice the holes in their game as they got older. You started to realize that a lot of their success came from talent, right? Not knowledge. So in Ali's case, as he got older, you started to notice that he didn't go to the body. You started to notice that in the middle of the ring, he needed a certain spacing. He didn't want to be deep in the pocket. Right? You noticed, especially in the Jimmy Young fight, and that's one of the most important fights I've seen, that Ali needed for the opponent to lead. He was a counterpuncher, not a switch. Right? He wasn't a guy who could say, okay, I'll lead in this fight because it'll give me an advantage. Right? Now, Ali was very knowledgeable. But he wasn't the fighter Salvador Sanchez was early in his career, where Sanchez was knowledgeable and could actually execute on everything. Right? Mike Tyson. Let's talk about him for a second. You noticed as Mike Tyson got older, that Tyson on his back foot wasn't the same. Right? There was a gap. There were two Mike Tysons. There was Mike Tyson on his front foot, the bully, who blew you out. But then there was the Mike Tyson who shows up in the Buster Douglas fight. Can't get through Douglas's jab. Douglas actually is pushing Tyson away. You notice it later in his career in the Lennox Lewis fight. Same dynamic. Bigger guy with the jab, pushing him away, hitting him on the way in. You notice in the Evander Holyfield fight, if you took away Tyson's uppercut, and if you dared to go inside on Mike Tyson, Tyson didn't have the answers to those questions. In other words, the Tyson we saw blowing everyone out in his early 20s didn't have the sport mapped out like the Floyd Mayweather in his early 20s, who could be defensive, who could be offensive, right? Who was relying on ring mastery in addition to having the benefits of youth, right? So that brings me to Anthony Joshua. Now I know, trust me, I read the comments to the videos. I know many people watching this video view this man as the next great heavyweight. I understand people view this guy as better than most champions, right, in history. That's the only way I can explain the betting line that had Joshua a big favorite before his fight against Wladimir Klitschko, a guy who had only lost once in the preceding decade. Right? I read the comments here online. There's an AJ contingent out there who believes that this guy, who's very well spoken, right? AJ, comes across as a guy who, in interviews feels a responsibility to portray himself in a certain image, right? If you were to script lines for a champion and put it in a movie, right? AJ is a guy who, even with opponents who are a little bit surly, right, in these Beyond the Glove shows, AJ's a guy who, takes the high road. One of the noteworthy things in his fight against Klitschko is both guys before the fight acted very respectfully toward each other, right? It's as if, AJ feels a certain social responsibility, right? He looks the part too. Big guy. In shape all the time. Hits hard. Right? If you're in a crowded room and said, pick out the heavyweight champ, someone might say, that muscular looking guy who looks like he lifts weights, who looks strong. Right? He's the heavyweight champion, and the rest of us would nod our heads. Right? People would pick out AJ before they pick out even great champions like Larry Holmes. Right? Just off AJ's body and stuff like that. But, right, I question his boxing knowledge base. I don't feel like I'm looking at Salvador Sanchez, Floyd Mayweather, right? I know AJ's in his later 20s now, but he's a young later 20s, right? He's not the guy who has been fighting the Danny Little Red Lopez's in his early 20s, the Gennaro Hernandez's in his early 20s. He's not that guy. I know now he's fought Wladimir Klitschko. Okay, great. But, right, as you look at that fight, you notice certain things. Right? Let's just go through some of them. And these are things that will give him problems against certain heavyweights. Right? Anthony Joshua is too upright, isn't he? Right? He stands upright. He's not a guy who knows how to fight small. Folks, there are big guys who know how to fight small. Right? Bernard Hopkins was big for a middleweight. Bernard Hopkins could bend and could get low and could get underneath your chin when he needed to. Right? Now, I question whether Anthony Joshua has those skill sets. He's upright. Right? He doesn't really hide his body, does he? Let's also say, too, that just how he's wired. Right? You don't see a lot of head movement. In fact, you don't see the kind of reflexes that you would expect to see in a fighter who is defensively blessed. Now, Floyd Mayweather met with Anthony Joshua. Right? Now, during that meeting, Floyd actually invited Anthony Joshua to the United States, to the Mayweather gym in Las Vegas. Now, understand, Floyd Mayweather, simply put, is one of the best defensive fighters ever. You can criticize Floyd on a lot of things, right? I was cringing looking at him play promoter at the Gervonta Davis, Liam Walsh press conference, right? Mayweather isn't fluid with crowds, right? He stays in character, right? And it's a character he's constructed. whatever you think about Floyd Mayweather, let's recognize that he defensively is blessed, right? Dare I say, every fight the guy had, every fight the guy had a defensive advantage on his opponent. He's defensively blessed, right? Understand too, Mayweather to me is like Salvador Sanchez. He's a savant, right? He just intuitively understands the sport. So Mayweather meets with Joshua, and Mayweather says to Joshua, hey, why don't you come to my gym? Let's work on your defense. Right? The things you see from defensively blessed fighters. Right? The punch is on the way. The guy's turning away already before the punch comes. Right? The guy, has a construct where he can't get hit in the side of the head easily, because the guy is hiding his head, might be below a shoulder, right? Something's in the way of the puncher and the side of the guy's head. Something's in the way of the puncher and the guy's chin. The guy's chin is tucked, right? Defensively blessed fighters, you'll notice they aren't at angles in fights where they could be easily hit. Now, that's not Anthony Joshua. He's 27 or whatever he is, and I didn't see the defensive instincts in his fight against Wladimir Klitschko. As I watch Joshua fights, folks, they're not there. Now, there's a difference between the guys I'm mentioning here, right? The LeBron Jameses, the Clayton Kershaws, right? The young master guys. And someone like Anthony Joshua, who in this regard is a lot like Mike Tyson, right? Understand the LeBron Jameses of the world, whatever advantages they have, right? When LeBron walks on a court, he's 6'9", right? He's a strong guy. He does things well. Whatever advantages those guys have, understand they're always working on the holes in their game. Always. Right? So, as you watch LeBron James, you'll notice that he does things that he took time to develop. Three-point shooting. Right? Think about it. The guy has a basketball game that's already A-level. But that's not good enough. Right? That's not good enough for him. He feels he needs to improve his three-point shooting. That's exactly what the guy has done. You think about how to rebound. Now here's LeBron, he's 6'9". He already's taller than a lot of other guys, right? 6'6", 6'7". LeBron's a guy who's taller than them and he's strong. But you watch LeBron rebounding, and you'll notice that he's obviously studied the great rebounders, Dennis Rodman, whoever, right? And LeBron knows how to rebound. The technique is there. Now Anthony Joshua, Olympic gold medalist, unbeaten professional. In other words, he's had the opportunity. He toured the world on the British Olympic team. Right? He knew he was going to go pro. He knew boxing was his sport. He then becomes a boxer. He's well connected, right? Eddie Hearn, etc. are part of his team. Elite people around him. We're several fights into his career. Now, I believe the mindset I'm talking about, the Salvador Sanchez mindset, the LeBron James mindset, the Magic Johnson mindset, right? These are the young guys, the Pele mindset, right? The Messi mindset. The young guys who come out and hit the ground running. Right? I believe that mindset would have Anthony Joshua with superior skills at this point. Right? You have a fighter out there in the UK who has the mindset I'm talking about. He's unbeaten, Tyson Fury. Right? Tyson Fury, righty, lefty, fights tall, fights small, deep in the pocket, outside of the pocket. Right? You see him with those skills, and you see those skills up until him stepping away from the sport recently, right, to take care of some personal issues. You saw those skills in fight after fight getting sharper and sharper. Not with Anthony Joshua. I view Joshua as the pitcher with the fastball who doesn't know how to pitch. So, people are out there speculating on his stamina. Right? He hadn't fought past the 7th round. It was an open question. Does Anthony Joshua have the stamina to go 12 rounds? Right? He then signs on to fight Wladimir Klitschko, huge puncher, but also a puncher who has gone 12 rounds in some big fights. A David Haye fight. That's Wladimir Klitschko at the end of the fight. The Marius Walk fight. Right? You knew Wladimir Klitschko could go 12 rounds. You'd seen him go 12 rounds. Alexander Povetkin fight. Right? You mean to tell me that in that fight, the Joshua Klitschko fight, where Joshua had to know that gamblers were questioning his stamina, right? The kind of situation where you knew a Floyd Mayweather or a Salvador Sanchez would already know how to pace themselves, right? They from early in their career, that mindset, the savant mindset, is, hey, I've got to figure this whole thing out. Terrence Crawford, another guy, right? Terrence Crawford, the mindset of the guy who says, hey, this is a craft. It has certain requirements. I need to fill in the gaps, right? I got a fastball. I need to learn a curveball. I need to learn a slider. I need to learn a changeup. I need to learn how to pace them. I need to figure out pitch sequence. That's not Anthony Joshua. So against Wladimir Klitschko, Joshua is out of gas. Not in the 11th round. Right? Not in the 12th round. He's out of gas in the 6th round. Think about it. The best interview I've read on the fight. Another fighter. Ironically, another fighter who some would say has some stamina issues himself. Luis Ortiz. Right? And Luis Ortiz is of the mindset that the ref saved Anthony Joshua in the 11th round. Right? Because if you look at the film, and I encourage you to revisit that 11th round, when Klitschko gets off the canvas the second time, he's over at the side and he's actually doing defense. Joshua comes in, is throwing a lot of punches. None of those punches land flush. Right? Klitschko is moving his head. Klitschko is doing defense. And according to Luis Ortiz, who might be right, had the ref allowed that fight to continue, and had Klitschko survived that round, would Anthony Joshua have had any gas left in the tank for the 12th round? I want you to revisit that 11th round and look at Joshua when the ref calls the fight. Does he look like a rested guy who's prepared to go another round? Or does he look like a guy whose tank is on E. Now, this is not to suggest that Joshua isn't extremely talented. Doesn't hit hard with both hands. Can't lower his shoulder and hit a guy to the body like he did Dillian Whyte, or come up with an uppercut from down low and almost decapitate a guy like he did to Wladimir Klitschko. That uppercut, simply put, is one of the best uppercuts, might be the best uppercut I've seen. Right? It was dramatic. But as you watch Anthony Joshua, he does what he does well. He's not a guy who worries about the things he doesn't do well, which is what separates him, in my opinion, at this stage of his career, from a Floyd Mayweather, from a Clayton Kershaw, from a LeBron James. Right? I believe those guys, from a Tyson Fury, I believe those guys view whatever they're doing as a complex puzzle. Right? And they go about trying to fix the weak parts. Right? As former President John F. Kennedy used to say, the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. Right? The Floyd Mayweather, LeBron James mindset is to fix the roof, learn new skills. Right? I just don't believe that that's this guy. So, he beat a guy who hadn't fought for more than a year in Wladimir Klitschko. If Klitschko decides he wants to continue his career, given that you're getting better than even money on Wladimir Klitschko, and given that Klitschko himself knows he had a huge opportunity to win the first fight in the 6th round. It's not like Klitschko enters this fight having been blown out, right? Having been mentally beaten. No, that's Klitschko blocking shots, dodging shots at the end of the first fight. I know he hits the canvas twice in that 11th round, but he's still actively engaged in the fight. He's not demoralized in the slightest, right? I think Klitschko is just more advanced of a fighter than Anthony Joshua. Let me say this too. That first fight, the stoppage saved us from the controversy. Right? Adam Booth, David Hayes' former trainer, had Klitschko up by a few rounds. Now, I encouraged the press to question him about it. Right? Just to understand, on my own scorecard, Joshua needed a stoppage to win the fight, or at least needed knockdown rounds, right? You know, if he came out in the 12th and dropped Klitschko in the 12th and got a 10-8 round there, okay. But I thought he was trailing in the fight at the time of the stoppage. Now, I know that's not how the judges had it scored. And I suspect, had there not been the stoppage, had this fight gone the distance, right, I suspect there would have been some controversy. Right? There would have been a contingent out there saying, you've got to be kidding. Right? On my scorecard, Wladimir Klitschko won this fight. Right? I'm not saying it was a blowout either way. What I am saying is I thought Klitschko was winning the fight before the 11th round happened. Certainly in the 11th round, 2 knockdowns, you're going to make that 10-7 for Anthony Joshua. Right? Had the fight continued. Right? But going into the 11th round, I had Klitschko winning the fight. I thought Anthony Joshua on his back foot isn't Anthony Joshua on his front foot. Right? He actually did impress me a little bit on his back foot. He did better than I thought. but his back foot game still trails his front foot game by a wide margin. Right? So, when the rematch is announced, just understand, because I believe Anthony Joshua is a guy living off what he does well, as opposed to a guy who is trying to tighten up what he doesn't. Right? Because I believe he's more Mike Tyson than he is Floyd Mayweather. Right? I'll be rolling with his opponent, who I feel is more skilled than him. Right? Wladimir Klitschko is in his 40s. But this is the heavyweight division. And heavyweights, we'll play Einstein here, right? Einstein's rule of relativity. Heavyweights don't age as fast, in my opinion, as do other divisions. So, fighters in their later 30s like Luis Ortiz are still viable in the heavyweight division. Part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of these heavyweight fights end by KO. Power's the last to go in terms of age. Right? A lot of it also has to do with the fact that some heavyweights are better conditioned than others. Wladimir Klitschko is a well-preserved 41 years old. Right? I'm going to take Klitschko in the rematch just like I did the first fight. I know a lot of people left comments after the first fight saying, Dwyer, you suck. Dwyer, you got this wrong. Dwyer, you have an axe to grind with AJ. Right? I don't. But if I'm here online being honest with you, I cannot equate AJ with a Mayweather, a Crawford, or a Tyson Fury. Right? Those other guys just do far more things in the ring than does Anthony Joshua, who, too upright, too flat-footed, doesn't move especially well, needs to be more front foot than back foot, needs spacing, right? Is really more of a plan A guy than a plan B or plan C guy. If the fastball's not working, UK, you have a problem. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.